Written and directed by Nicholas Guiney, we are talking The Activated Man. And this is one of these kind of situations that I love doing this channel where I come across a real gem of a movie. So, The Activated Man. Hard movie to describe this one. The nearest I would suggest this movie is a little bit like the movie Scanners, minus the head exploding and more of a spiritual kind of element to it. So, the movie focuses on a couple and they have just lost their pet dog. And the guy especially is devastated by this, and he is kind of spiraling into depression. He's very much, sees this as a very traumatic event in his life. However, this actually unlocks a latent kind of psychic ability. Now, at the same time, we have a rash of murder-suicides that have the police baffled as to why the number is so high. And the girlfriend in this couple is actually a kind of a police detective, so she's kind of investigating it. So we have kind of almost two stories that kind of interlink, where on one hand we have this policewoman who is kind of investigating these crimes and who could be behind it and what's kind of the link here between what we've spoken about. At the same time, Oz, our main kind of protagonist, is dealing with this kind of loss of his dog and ends up having these visions of this kind of fedora wearing man, or a shadow person as they kind of described. He kind of ends up meeting Tony Todd's character, who is a renowned psychic medium that kind of acts as a guide. And that's all I'm going to say on the plot here, because I don't want to kind of spoil anything further with it. So this has got a pretty good cast of horror and kind of genre icons. Tony Todd, Kane Hodder, Sean Young, Vladimir Kulich. So there's a few recognisable faces here. And as I said, the movie's kind of like Scanners. So if you've seen Scanners, you may get an idea about where this kind of movie is going. But I'm not going to say if not. So, what did I like about it? Okay, so one thing that I've talked about in many a film review here is how the importance of characters is and having good characterization. And boy, does this movie do that. Let's talk about our main couple, Oz and Sara. So Oz is the guy who has kind of lost his dog, and Sara, his girlfriend, the police detective. Such good chemistry. The way this couple is portrayed for the vast majority of this movie is excellent. A real, like, kind of realistic relationship where they support each other. They have their ups and downs, but they are very much kind of in each other's corner. Like, Oz is really can't cope with the kind of loss of his dog, and Sara is there supporting him, and she's very much in his corner. And even though she's, he starts to see like ghostly visions of his dog, and she can't see them, but she sort of doesn't poo-poo the idea. She's very much in support of him, and just the kind of like, it's such an interesting kind of like portray of grief here. Obviously we had John Wick where he kind of lost his dog, but here it's just the loss of a dog is treated so seriously and has such a kind of emotional impact on the character of Oz. I mean, that he likens it to losing a son. And I think the movie really doesn't try and suggest otherwise. I mean, it really treats the loss of this dog like a genuine kind of loss of a family member, and you really do feel the loss and sorrow coming from the character of Oz. And it actually has some real emotional resonance here. And this is the catalyst to unlocking a kind of a psychic ability that Oz has, that enables him to sort of peek into other worlds, so to speak, and able to other worlds to kind of peek back, so to speak. And this is the impetus for the story here, is that not everything is all positive, you might say. And that starts a kind of a sort of spiritual awakening for both characters, really, but particularly with Oz. guided by Tony Todd in again a very sort of subtle performance here. He's very much a kind of a man of like peace and spirituality, and I think even though I'm not like a spiritual person necessarily or a religious person, I think the depiction here of what it would mean to people, I think, is very strong, and how basically, for example, Tony Todd's character, he says that, you know, there's a kind of, I'll paraphrase, but he's basically saying he's a good psychic because he doesn't necessarily pigeonhole himself into a particular religion and kind of is open to kind of everything, and therefore he's able to kind of see the bigger picture, so to speak, or more of the bigger picture, because he's not kind of like a Catholic or a Hindu or something like that. He's just trying to kind of get a greater like spiritual realization. So the movie has this kind of like metaphysical kind of undertone with it, without kind of necessarily poo-pooing religion, and they do sort of circle back to some kind of religious aspects and stuff. So I think the character work here, I think the depictions of the metaphysical world, spirituality, and what it can mean and how it's depicted, I think is very, very well done. It is a low budget movie, but nonetheless, I think the resonance that this movie is able to kind of produce, I think, is tangible, and I think it's a very strong film with a very an interesting and deep emotional kind of connective tissue. And then as the film goes on, and I'm going to be vague here when I'm talking about these points, it gets into more of a kind of a mystery. What's actually gone? You know, who's actually responsible? How has this happened? What are motivations? And it turned it into an intriguing horror mystery. The characterization is so good, even though this movie isn't a particularly like gory or scary film. You're so wrapped up in the characters. There was like a kind of a jump scare moment that came out. I mean, that really got me, because I was just so invested in the sort of the characters here that we had this kind of snap of a horror moment, and it was like blah. You know, it's nothing. If you take it out of context, it really doesn't seem that particularly like horrific moment. But it's just because the kind of the character work and the film around it is so engrossing, it kind of really kind of, I think, lands. And then we have the idea of these kind of shadow people who are there to, they can't physically hurt you, but they can influence you. And this ultimately is the negative force, which is trying to create havoc, and for reasons that will become explained in the movie. So I thought this had some great kind of like story elements to it, and intriguing mystery that kind of goes through a real gambit of different type of elements here, and story kind of beats. I think the acting is solid. It has to be, to have that kind of like, you've got well-written characters, you've got great performances, and I think that couples to make this such an engrossing movie. The VFX, I mean, they are on the lower budget side, but I gotta say, I think they work. And we have Oars is able to kind of see the kind of the spirit of his dog, which kind of visits him, and it's like, it's kind of low five, you know what I mean? But it worked in the context of the movie. You still feel like what you're seeing on screen is what the character is seeing and stuff. So I think it does work in actual fact, despite the fact this is obviously a very low budget movie. What doesn't work in this movie, it's possibly a little bit long at times. I think there are scenes where the movie kind of slows down just a tad, a little bit too much. There is one occasion where our characters, Oars and Sara, their first big fight, which is suggested that it's been influenced by dark forces. They just kind of seem to flip on a little bit of a dime, and I felt that there needed to be a little bit of that needed to be extended a little bit, because it just seems that they kind of ended up nearly killing each other in the blink of an eye, where I felt like it turned on too much of a dime, if you see what I mean. The VFX and the kind of the general presentation of the movie is low budget, and maybe this is why this movie won't appeal to some because, you know, it just has a very low budget kind of look to the movie, if that makes sense. But the writing, the direction, the acting, and the ideas of the story are so strong. I do think this movie overcomes its budgetary restraints, at least for someone who is used to watching movies that are a low budget. Maybe like people who only watch kind of like mainstream films might find this just a little bit too low tech to a degree. But I have to say, this is one of these, like I say, one of these gems that come along that really, like, do you know what? This is why I love low budget indie movies or B movies, because you get these movies that are just great and just kind of really hit. And I really enjoyed this one. I was thoroughly engrossed. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And this Blackened Heart doesn't really get that emotive with films, I have to say. But this one, it gave me the feels. It gave me the feels. And that is a hard thing to do, let me tell you. This movie is pretty strong if you don't mind, as I say, a little bit of a low budget aesthetic. And maybe a couple of pacing issues. But it's a strong 8 out of 10 for me. I would recommend this one. Have you heard of it? Would you see it based on what I told you? And have you seen it? Please let me know what your thoughts are, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time.